I call the Honourable Minister Anne Tolley.
Mr. Speaker, excuses, excuses and more excuses. And every time we talk about education, what do we get from Labor and its close friends, the unions? All we've heard for the last few years is excuses, excuses, and all the while our students have been falling behind, slowly, steadily and surely falling behind the rest of the world. And it's always someone else's fault. It's never Labor's fault. It's never the government's fault. And when we dare to suggest that we actually follow and measure a child's progress and talk to the parents about that child's progress, what did we get from the unions and from Labor? Nothing, nothing helpful, nothing constructive. They fought it actively every step of the way. And they said to us, we don't need to measure anything. The kids, I've heard principals stand up and say, why are we measuring kids' progress? Because actually if they fall behind a little bit in those first years, they will catch up when they're ready. I've had parents say to me they've been told that time and time again by their teachers, don't worry about little Johnny if he's not learning to read yet, because he'll catch up when he gets a bit older. Well, they haven't caught up. Now the evidence is clear, and Labor and the teacher unions should be hanging their heads in shame because they have failed those kids. There are no excuses. They have to take responsibility because they sat there for 9 years as a government and believed it when the unions told them that everything was okay. The union mantra was, we know who these kids are who are failing, and I heard Chris Hipkins say that again this morning. We know who these kids are who are failing. Well, my question is always, what did you do for 9 years while you watched those kids fail? Because this PISA result is telling us that you watched them continue to fail and you did nothing. You had huge surpluses, you could have done something, and you did nothing. And you were a minister, Mr. Mallard, and you watched and you are responsible. Mr. Speaker, after National had been in government, I have a quote, Mr. Speaker, on my whiteboard in my office. I've kept it because to me it sums up everything that's wrong with NZEI in this country and the New Zealand Principals Federation. It was from a principal who was a member of both, and it said in a letter to me, he said, the implied message from these national standards is that everyone in New Zealand has to be literate and numerate. What a sad place school will be if this type of nonsense continues. That, Mr. Speaker, is from a New Zealand primary principal, a leading principal in both NZEI and NZPF, who doesn't think it's important for kids to learn to read and write. And that's why our prisons are overflowing with prisoners who cannot read and write, Mr. Speaker. This member should take a call if he wants to take part in this debate instead of casting aspersions across the House, and no one's really interested, Mr. Speaker. That's why our prisons are full of prisoners who can't read and write, haven't been able to hold down a job, have no skills that would make them employable, and that's why we are now facing the truth about our education system, that our 15-year-olds are not the best in the world anymore. Because actually, when it came down to it, Labor didn't care. They didn't care enough to stand up to the teacher unions and demand change in an education system that was failing kids. Well, on this side of the House, we do care. We've put students and their parents first, and we've stood up to the unions, and we have introduced a range of changes designed to address the failure that we all knew was coming, because we did know that this day was coming. We were warned. I went off to the OECD as Minister of Education, and they told me they had warned the previous Labor government too, that the the education system in New Zealand, that it was getting complacent, that it wasn't based on evidential learning. That is not a lie. Mr. Schleicher warned the Labour government they had to make systemic changes, and he warned me, and we were putting in national standards, and the OECD has continued to back the changes that this government has made. But it's not going to happen overnight. And I said in 2010, when we introduced those standards, it could take 5 years or more before we saw substantial change in our system. And I said in 2010 there had been no change in our reading performance since 2000. That was 9 years under a Labour government, and in maths since 2003. So we shouldn't be surprised when we see the results that we're facing here today. Remember, national standards was introduced by the Labour government because 1 in 5 of our kids in school were failing. In other words, the schools were failing them, the education system was failing them, and the Labour government had failed them, education minister after education minister, who would not have the courage to stand up to the unions and make the changes they knew needed to be made. And Minister Mallard knew that there needed to be changes made, and the union actually backed him down. He did not go through with what he knew needed to be done. This government introduced the Youth Guarantee, which was designed to give free education to students up to age 18 who had dropped out of the schooling environment. And they had been deserted by Labour, whose only answer was to lift the school leaving age. Well, actually, those kids weren't at school anyway. They were some of the 30,000 truants every day from our schooling system. And this government tackled those kids with some innovative programs between secondary and tertiary institutions, things like trades academies, service academies, that tertiary education for trades education and tertiary institutions. And now we are seeing over 10,000 of those young people re-engaged in education and getting skills and training and qualifications. These are fantastic results for kids that Labour abandoned. And Labour continues to back the unions over kids. We've heard it from them today. They want no change in the system. They're going to promise to roll back all the changes that National has made over the last 5 years, should they ever, for the unfortunate sake of the country, should they ever reach Treasury benches. So they want more of the same through those 2 years of the 2000s when kids were being failed by the education system. Is that really what they're promoting? Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome these PISA results because they show that National has been right all along. The education system did need a systemic change. We have been right to shake up the education system on behalf of kids and on behalf of their parents. And I still am approached by parents in airports who say, thank goodness you guys stood up for us and made sure that we got good information about what's happening to our children early on in their school time so that we can make sure that we support them and we help them learn whilst they're in those all-important primary years. So, Mr. Speaker, all I can say to Labour is just get out of the way, because this side of the House is absolutely determined, as the Minister has said, to make sure that 5 out of 5 kids succeed in our school, and we've got a lot of work to do, and we want those people out of our way.
Point of order, the Honourable Member Jami-Lee Ross.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the speech of the Honourable Anne Tolley, the Honourable Trevor Mallard was making a number of interjections which are clearly unparliamentary and offend Speaker's ruling 42, 2 and 3, and I'd ask that he be asked to withdraw them.
Well, can I just say to the member that if there is offence taken, it should be taken at the time during the course of the debate, not afterwards. Honourable members. Point of order, the Honourable Minister and Tolly.
I take offence at some of the comments that were made. I was in the middle of a speech, and of course if you interrupt your speech to address comments that are being made across the House, they are recorded in Hansard. I didn't want those recorded in Hansard, but I do take offence. It was extremely unparliamentary language that was being, insults that were being hurled across the House.
Well, can I thank them and just say, look, this is a robust Parliament. And it's a wide-ranging debate, and the Minister at the time should have taken a point of order. That's the way it operates in this Parliament. I've already ruled...
New point of order.
Yes, you can make a point.
You know, separate to the issue of whether personal insult was taken, I mean, those interjections weren't rare and witty and to the point. They were actually continuous barracking to try and put the Speaker off his stride.
Can I just say again, look, we have a robust Parliament here. This is open for debate. It's a very passionate issue from all the members involved, and one has to expect that in a healthy democracy. Honourable members, the time for this debate has expired. I'm therefore going to call on the general debate. I understand it's a National Party call, so would some honourable member care to move that the House take note of miscellaneous business?
Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Minister Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker.